I'm going to walk you through the whole paper as if because I don't know obviously what levels you are working towards. So I'm going to basically be aiming to the top here, but I'm going to be breaking down each question so that you should be really familiar with it by the end and feel hopefully really confident. Okay. But I'm going to assume that you don't know too much about it and I'm going to really break it down. This is paper one. So this is what it looks like, okay? Obviously, as we know, you only have an hour and 45 minutes. So you have 1 hour to essentially answer questions 1 to 4, and then you have 45 minutes to answer question 5. Now, within that hour, for answering questions 1 to 4, AQA essentially give you 15 minutes to read the extract. It might take some people 5 to 10 minutes. It might take you a little bit longer to read the extract, but essentially they allocate 15 minutes. So you really only have 45 minutes to answer questions 1 to 4, and then obviously 45 minutes to answer question 5. What you need to make sure you are doing, the biggest tip I can give you is in the example, most of them have digital clocks now and analog clocks, but make sure when your exam starts, so if it starts at 9, when it gets to 10 o'clock, just make sure that you are essentially moving on to question 5, because question 5 is worth 50% of the whole paper. So it's really important that you give yourself enough time to answer that. Let's go down. First question. Now, this is a super easy question. It is literally you read in a small section. So in this case, you're reading lines 1 to 9, and you are ultimately just ticking a box. Well, not ticking, you're circling. One way I would suggest is just literally boxing out so that you don't go outside the lines. But it is just literally picking out explicit detail. Let's read the whole extract first, and then we'll answer that question, because generally what I would advise is you just read the extract straight away and then go through the questions. In this case, we are looking at an extract from Dracula. It will always give you a little bit of context at the top here. So it says, in this extract, the narrator, a young solicitor, so lawyer, named Jonathan Harker, describes a terrifying encounter one night at the castle of Count Dracula. So you will always have that information to begin with. So it gives you a little bit of an understanding as to where in the novel it is. Is it at the beginning of the book or is it in the middle? But you'll get a little bit of context. So let's read through. Again, if you want to, for those of people that have just joined, if you want to download the document, it's in the chat there. Otherwise, you can just follow along with me. When I had written in my diary and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, I felt sleepy. I suppose I had fallen asleep. I hope so, but I fear for all that followed was startlingly real. So real that now sitting here in the broad, full sunlight of the morning, I cannot in the least believe that it was all sleep. I was not alone. The room was the same. I could see along the floor in the brilliant moonlight my own footsteps marked where I had disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me, there were 3 young women. I thought at the time that I must be dreaming when I saw them, for though the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow on the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time and then whispered together. 2 were dark and had beak-like noses like the Count and great dark piercing eyes that seemed to be almost red when contrasted with the pale yellow moon. The other was fair as can be, with great wavy masses of golden hair and eyes like pale sapphires. All 3 had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby lips. So as we can see at the beginning here, in the first paragraph, we have the narrator. He's writing in his diary. He's a little bit confused. He can't quite understand whether what he experienced was a dream or not. Then the second paragraph, which I then read, he describes seeing 3 women and he mentions that they have sharp teeth. There's a lot of supernatural references here. We have a lot of kind of this idea of this darkness, it's moonlight, it's nighttime. So a lot of Gothic conventions. He's just seen these 3 women. Now on to the third paragraph. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl arched her neck. She actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped with white, sharp teeth. So we have a description of the white contrasted with the red lips. Again, very Gothic. She's described as being quite animalistic. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Then she paused and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue. Then she paused and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips and could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle it approaches nearer and nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips on the supersensitive skin of my throat and the hard dents of two sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. Immediately, it's kind of presented that they are vampire-esque. We've got these three women, so he's still working out whether it was a dream or whether it wasn't. He has met these three women have essentially come into his room. They are described with white teeth, red lips. They appear quite supernatural in being. And here we have them putting their fangs into his neck, okay? He says here, hard dents of two sharp teeth. Just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in a languorous ecstasy and waited with a beating heart. Then on to this last paragraph. But at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of Count Dracula. So we have an introduction of a new character, Dracula, and of his being as if lapped in a storm of fury. As my eyes opened, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman, and with giant's power draw it back, the blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth champing with rage, and the fair cheeks blazing red with passion. So we have Count Dracula, really angry, essentially is pushing the women away and essentially claiming that this, our narrator, whose name is Jonathan Harker, is his, okay? So he is displaying everything you would expect in kind of like a predator. But the Count, never did I imagine such wrath and fury even to the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them burned bright, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them. So if you were reading this and you're still not sure whether it was supernatural, at this point you would see that actually he doesn't seem human at all. He's this really kind of violent, aggressive, animalistic, predatorial being. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hand-like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose now seemed like a heaving bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his arm, he hurled the women from him and then motioned to the others. So he basically threw one woman away as though he were beating them back. It was the same commanding gesture that I had seen used to the wolves. In a voice which, though low and almost in a whisper, seemed to cut through the air and then ring around the room, he said, "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast eyes on him when I had forbidden it? Back, I tell you, this man belongs to me." That is the extract we are working with, okay? So we have our narrator, who's a solicitor, who's staying at a castle. The castle was owned by Count Dracula. It is presented that Count Dracula is a supernatural being. We're going to guess that he is a vampire. There's three women there also at the castle, also appear to be vampires. And essentially the narrator is just feeling complete fear and also confusion because he's writing in his diary at the beginning. He's not sure whether what he experienced was real or not. Let's look at question 1. What made the narrator, Jonathan, believe the experience might have been a dream? So here, I'm just going to show you how you would answer it. So he could not remember how he entered the room. He had fallen asleep before. The room changed completely during the night. Now remember, we're only looking at lines 1 to 9. So I am going to click or circle. Okay, he had fallen asleep beforehand. So that's what added to that confusion. How many women does the narrator see? 3. Also, just in terms of 3, some of you might study Macbeth, but 3 is often a supernatural number. And it's to do with religion. So if you think in Christianity, you have the Holy Trinity, which is when people say the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So the 3. In Gothic fiction, this is subverted. We have, for example, 3 witches in Macbeth. Okay, so they subvert that Christianity and turn it on its head. So we have like kind of like the devil and, you know, God, for example. So always in text, if you see kind of 3 things, think, does it link to the supernatural? It's just a quick tip there. Okay, so we know there's 3 women. What does the narrator say he can see on the floor in the moonlight? He says his own footsteps. What light is shining in the room when the narrator sees the woman? Moonlight. Now, if you get one of these wrong, okay, you can just literally cross it and then circle the next one. It tells you here, okay? It will tell you what to do on the first page. These marks are automized. So the computer does it, so the examiners don't actually see this. So just make sure you have circled the right one. Sometimes I think a lot of students just rush through that because they think it's so easy and they miss marks. And that one mark could be the difference between a 3 and a 4 or an 8 and a 9, for example. Okay, let's dive straight into question 2. Question 2 is your analysis question. Okay, so you are being assessed on your analysis. Okay, so the skill of analysis. You have probably been taught a certain acronym to use when you're approaching this. So it might be PEE or PESL or PETAL. Any of those is absolutely, they all sort of do the same thing, but I'm going to kind of teach you a specific one that I use with my students. So this is the question. Look in detail at this extract from line 16 to 26. Now you already have the box here. Okay, so you don't need to look at the extract for this. How does the writer use language to describe the girl? So the focus of the question is, how is the girl described? It says you could include the writer's choice of words or phrases. So these are essentially, your things like your verbs, adjectives, your individual words. Okay. Language features and techniques. So again, these are, your things like your metaphors, your personification, similes. Now, it also says sentence forms. Now, I always tell my students to cross that out and do not comment on sentence forms. Year on year, as an examiner myself, but also in examiner reports, students really struggle to write about sentences. And it's because it is really difficult to do. And a lot of the time, the text that you are given, there isn't too much to say. Now, you could get full marks, so 8 out of 8 marks just writing about language. And a lot of the time, most students do. So don't waste your time with sentence forms. Now, obviously, if your teacher has taught you a specific way or you feel comfortable commenting on sentences, then write about them. But most of the time, anytime I'm marking, students kind of waste almost a whole paragraph and time writing about sentences, and they could have just written, about the rich words and phrases within the extract. So I would say don't worry about sentences. You only need to spend around max 12 minutes. Normally, students spend a lot longer on this, and I can tell when I'm marking because they're really well crafted, analytical paragraphs. But the problem is, it's only worth 8 marks. And they tend to, question 4 then struggles. And that's what I call exam technique. So the more you practice, the better you get with timing and pulling out language. Okay, so let's just look at this extract. So this is the bit where he describes one of the girls. So I'm going to show you how I would annotate, and I'm going to show you an example paragraph, which would be part of kind of an 8 out of 8 grade 9 type answer. So here we have, I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl arched her neck. She actually licked her lips like an animal. So I'm going to pull out just anything that I think is quite interesting to start. Till I could see the moonlight, the moisture shining on the scarlet lips. Quite like that one as well. Scarlet lips. And on the red tongue as it lapped with white, sharp teeth. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Then she paused and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips, and could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle it approaches nearer and nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips on the super sensitive skin of my throat and the hard dent of 2 sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. So she's about to pierce the skin. I closed my eyes in a languorous ecstasy and waiting with a beating heart. Okay, so I've just pulled out a couple of things that I want to annotate. Now, straight away here, I'm going to pull out the word licked. More specifically, it is a verb. It is a doing word. So I'm going to pull out the word licked. And now in my head, it kind of suggests hunger, sort of anticipation. It's kind of what you would see in the wild if you're watching kind of like a David Attenborough documentary and you've got the lion who's about to kind of attack. You see them generally licking their lips. So straight away, this imagery that's being presented is one that she is like more like an animal than human. So with anticipation, also, it's almost like there's almost this sense of excitement as she's about to hunt. So I'm just going to write almost a sense of excitement about to kill. Okay, so straight away, that's one word that I've zoomed in on and I have annotated. Then licked her lips like an animal. Now, this in itself is a simile. Okay, so immediately what we see is the writer. So always commenting on the writer. So the writer immediately compares her to a creature. Zoom out a little bit. And I would say that because she's licking her lips, it kind of seems that she is driven by instinct. I'm going to show you in a minute how I pull these annotations into a paragraph as well, okay? Rather than anything human, okay? So what I should say is if you do have questions, do put them in the chat and then at some point I'll get round to answering them. So you can put them as and when you have them as we're going through each question, or if you need a little bit more clarification on something. So straight away, we have her presented as a creature driven by instinct rather than anything human. You know, what makes us human is things like sense of reason. We can reason, a sense of morality, knowing right from wrong. Here, we just have pure animal instinct that's being presented by this woman. Okay, now as I go on, I could pull out the fact that we have a lot of contrasting language here. So scarlet, we've got a scarlet lip, so red lips, red tongue, and it's contrasted with white. Sometimes students are also struggle with analysis because they say they actually don't know how to analyze. Like, what does analyzing look like? What does it mean? It quite literally is you picking out a word that you like, a good word, and you looking at the association, so the connotations of that word. So if I was to look at the connotations of red, in my brain, in my head, I'm thinking, well, that color I associate with blood. I associate it with danger. Okay. So in your head, you might think something slightly different. When I think about the word white, get rid of that, I automatically think of purity. I think of something that's clean. Okay. Something that might be untouched. I'm just putting words down of, anything that I associate with that particular word. Religiously, white is often associated with purity. This was written around the Victorian period. So we would think about the context of that, like you would with your literature text. You might bring in some religious references. A lot of writers in that time always brought them in. But I'm thinking, okay, so here straight away, we've got blood danger versus purity, clean, being untouched. We have a direct contrast. So that contrast between the red lips and the white teeth really highlights the teeth specifically. I could say the writer is trying to emphasize the danger associated with the sharp teeth and how our narrator is in imminent danger. So I've just seen in the chat there, how long should you spend annotating the text on question 2? I'm taking a little bit longer because I'm walking you through my process, but generally a couple of minutes. I would say read it, highlight it as I go through, pull annotations out, and then probably 3-4 minutes. And then you'll be able to concisely answer the question with 3 points. I mean, I would suggest 3 Peasel paragraphs. 3 Peasel paragraphs. So you're having 3 points, and I would pull out 3 quotations. That's all you need. And one quotation could literally just be one word. I've seen full 8 out of 8 answers where the student has literally just chosen 3 words from the whole extract and they've included them in each paragraph. So in their first Peasel paragraph, they've just annotated one word, like licked, for example, that I've pulled out there. In their second paragraph, they've pulled out, let's say, sharp, for example. So you can do that because what you are being assessed on is not how many quotations you can pull out. You are being assessed on what you can do with the language, what you can say about the language. So why does the writer use specific word choices? What imagery, what effect are they trying to create? In this case, here I'm thinking, well, there's a lot of references between red and white. There is a lot of references to the teeth being sharp. So I know that the writer is trying to create this kind of dangerous atmosphere and present the girl as this dangerous kind of unnatural being. So just moving on, just to kind of go through a little bit more of annotations, I'm just going to pull out churning sound, this idea of churning. We might see a machine that churns or like a steam train, an engine that churns. So in my head, again, these are associations, connotations that you have in your head. I'm thinking the churning sound of her tongue makes her seem mechanical, kind of robotic. Again, the writer is emphasizing that she is not human. This would evoke fear from the reader. Remember, you are the reader. A couple of final things here. We have lots of references to sharp teeth. I wouldn't comment on repetition because that's question three structure. Okay, I'm just looking at the words. So we have sharp teeth here. Again, it's presenting her as this forceful being, she's dangerous. What I would then do is I'm thinking about my 3 points. My first point is quite literally, I know that she's not a human. Okay, the writer isn't presenting her as a human. She's presented as this kind of unnatural, dangerous individual. So my first paragraph is here. Okay, so here you'll see the structure. So Peasel. I really like this structure, Peasel, because it emphasizes that zoom. And that is where you will get the most marks when you zoom in on the language and explain it in detail. I see a lot of acronyms. So when I say acronyms, I just mean when it's shortened to PEASL. So point, evidence, zoom, explain, link. I see a lot of these kind of these structures thrown around online. Some are like 9, 10, letters long. You don't need that. I'm telling you, you just keep it nice and simple. You will be familiar with PEASL or petal or peel, but this is a structure that I would teach. This does everything you need to do to achieve full marks for this question. So this is how I would pull it together. The writer uses animalistic imagery to create a sense of danger and otherworldliness in the girl. He describes her as licking her lips like an animal and shows her movements as she lowers her head with the hard dents of two sharp teeth, just touching and pausing there. The verb lick, so here we've got subject terminology. Licking suggests an instinctive animalistic behaviour, implying that she is driven by primal urges rather than human emotion. The comparison to an animal emphasizes her predatory nature, suggesting that she is instinct driven and not human in her behavior. The focus of her teeth and the precise, almost mechanical detail of the hard dents, so that kind of links to the idea of churning, highlights a threatening and menacing presence rather than a human or relatable character. By portraying her in this way, the writer makes the reader feel anxious and tense. So again, we're bringing it back to why the writer has done it. That's really important, because they want the reader to feel a certain way. So in this case, the writer presents this girl as dangerous because he wants the reader to feel scared of them, just like the narrator does. So by portraying her in this way, the writer makes the reader feel anxious and tense, as if Harker, that's the narrator, himself is in imminent danger. The imagery positions her as a supernatural predator, reinforcing the horror of the scene and the idea that he is trapped in a place where natural rules do not apply. This gem demonstrates how the writer's use of animalistic language intensifies the frightening atmosphere and conveys the girl's threatening, unnatural qualities. You can, if you want, screenshot that as a good kind of example answer for Peasel, for your first point. If I was then going to, because I need to do 2 more paragraphs, so I would suggest 2 to 3 paragraphs. For this one, I might write 3. My second point would probably be about how the writer uses violent and threatening imagery to prevent the girl as dangerous. That might be my point 2, that she's presented as dangerous through violent imagery. And then my third point might be that the writer uses sensory language to show kind of the girl's threatening effect on the narrator. And when I say sensory language, think about, the touch, sound, smell, all of that. And we see that all here when he talks about how he can feel the tingle and he's shivering. All of this sensory language of her approaching, one makes him seem super vulnerable to her. It just highlights her power. But again, it really depicts the scene well, as if we are there and we can feel what he can feel. And that's exactly what you should do for question 5 as well. Always use sensory language. So, conscious of time, I'm going to zoom straight on to question 3. Now, question 3, a lot of students struggle with this because I think they overcomplicate it. It's actually, and it is a tricky question in itself. They have made it a bit easier this year now. They've changed it slightly. So you'll benefit from that. So question 3, this is structure. Okay. So you now need to think about the whole source. So you look at the whole source for this. The text is taken from the middle of the novel, Dracula. So it will tell you if it's from the beginning or the middle. It will give you that context. Where the narrator finds himself alone in a strange room at night. As the scene unfolds, he encounters three mysterious women and then witnesses the sudden arrival of Count Dracula. How has the writer structured to build tension? So, straight away, we are focusing on how tension is built, okay? When we think about tension, what does it actually mean? So you might have, how has the writer structured the text to build suspense? You'll have something there, okay? In this case, it's tension. Now, tension quite literally just means, a sense of excitement. So we just need to be clear on what they're asking us here. It also could be kind of this fear or suspense. So basically, how has the writer written it in a way where it's actually interesting and it makes us want to read on? It will give you 3 bullet points there so how suspense is increased and decreased by the end of the source, how the writer uses structure to create an effect, and the writer's use of any other structural features. With language, you are looking at, individual verbs, adjectives, for example, similes, metaphors, personification. For structure, it says other structural features. These are the structural features, okay? So when we talk about structure, we're commenting on these things. So narrative perspective, is it written in first person or third? So first, we'll always have I, okay? We are walking through the scene with the character. Third person, it will be they, okay? They're describing the person, the character, the events, kind of from above, from afar. You need to look at what is the focus at the beginning, middle, and end. Why does the writer shift focus? And I'll explain that in a minute. Dialogue, which is just speech. Repetition, so are words repeated throughout? Is imagery repeated? Foreshadowing, so is the writer hinting? So foreshadowing quite literally just means the writer is hinting that something maybe bad or ominous is about to happen. So you can guess what's going to happen next, but they don't explicitly write it in the text. So foreshadowing is that hint. Flashback, flash forward. So are they, flashing back to a memory? Are they flashing forward? So in this case, he is writing in his diary after the event has happened. So this extract is somewhat a flashback to what he experienced with the 3 women and Dracula. And then a circular and cyclical structure. Let's look at the first line, last line. Are they similar or different? We might see this structure here with like a cyclical structure where, the person starts on a beach and then at the end of the extract, they're on the beach again. Maybe a different one, maybe the same one. That is when it circles back on itself. They are your structural features. It's worth making a note of those because one things that the examiners say with this question is students seem to be a little bit confused with structural features. They've got better in recent years, students are commenting on some. It's still not the same way as students would comment on language features like metaphors, personification, and so on. These are the main ones that you need to know. You do not comment on all of these. Bear that in mind. You can just comment on 3. Okay, or however many that you need to make your point. So again, this is an 8-mark question. So really, I would say max, an absolute max, really you want to spend 10 minutes on this, but at an absolute max, 12 minutes. Now, I would always, so keeping it simple, the acronym we're going to use is PEE. It's all you need, okay? We're not analysing language, we're not zooming in. You are just writing. Why has the writer used first person perspective? Evidence it, always use quotations for this question, and then explain why they've used first person. Oh, they've used first person because they want us as the reader to feel fear, just like the narrator does, as he's experiencing this kind of traumatic event, for example. Okay, so always explain why, why the writer has chosen one of these structural features. So you're looking at 3 PE paragraphs, making sure you are commenting on why the writer has used that structural feature. That's one thing in the exam report students often forget. They'll comment on and say, the writer has used a flashback. Great, but they don't explain why they've used flashback and what the effect of that flashback is. What effect does it have on you as a reader? You as the reader might look at this and think, well, I'm not affected at all. But you need to imagine what another reader might be affected by. One thing I would say, when you are starting, you obviously can take pens and highlighters into the exam with you. With a separate highlighter, split the text into 3. So you've got your beginning, middle, and end. 3 paragraphs. Your first paragraph will be the beginning. Again, if you've got any questions, add them in the chat. Middle, oh, middle and end. Okay, so they're your three paragraphs. Now, splitting it into three, I would split it like this. Okay, so this is my beginning. This is my middle. I'm going to talk about this for my second paragraph, and for my third and final paragraph, this is the end. If you're weak on why, explain bit, how would you recommend practicing this, or is it just practice over time? So if you struggle, and this is the bit that most students struggle with, why? So why has the writer used first person perspective? Why has the writer used a flashback? Why has the writer shifted focus? I'm going to go through that now. I would say with language, paper 1 and 2, the best way to revise is by practicing and also getting your teacher to mark. Students that I've had, the ones that have got the grade 9s or got the target that they wanted, the ones who've made the most progress essentially are the ones that have practiced and brought them in and had me mark them and just keep practicing. But using that structure, PE, and then comment it, think about it like this. Let me just show you rather than me explain it like that. Okay, so beginning. We have straight away, look at all the eyes. We know it is first person perspective, okay? Right. So it's first person perspective. Now, this is something you can basically just apply to any text that you get. First person is always used to create a relationship with the reader. It's used so that we can experience events in the same time and the same way as the narrator does, to build tension and suspense. Okay. Third person creates distance. So a third person narrative creates a distance between us as the reader and the narrator. So we see things more objectively. We're not caught up in the emotions of how the narrator is feeling. So we might be more detached, but objective as a reader. And the writer would use first person because they want us to not know and see everything like you would in a third person perspective. They want us to be as in the dark and as confused as the narrator, because only then do we as the reader feel fear. Okay, we feel confusion, we feel suspense. Third person, you get all the detail, everything's laid out for you, you don't feel that same fear. Okay, so in terms of why, you can apply that why to any first or third person narrative. It will only be written in those two. So in this case, we've got this first person perspective. It creates tension because, again, excitement, fear. We experience the events through his eyes and we are as confused as he is. We don't know that these are supernatural beings. A third person narration might tell us that they are supernatural. But first person, we are seeing things through his eyes. We have no idea. So we are as confused as he is. And then what we have at the beginning, it definitely is quite calm. You know, he's writing it in his diary. He has, again, woken up. Then we have this kind of this flashback, okay, and a shift in focus. So we have a shift. Keyword, shift. Always include the word shift when you're answering, okay? So we have a shift from him writing in his diary to this fearful experience, okay? And the introduction of the three women, okay? So we have a shift from him writing in his diary to the women. Why do we have this shift? Well, because we're kind of lulled into this false sense of security. We start in a calm way. He's in the sunlight of the morning. He's now reflecting on the contrasting night. So we have this shift to build this sense of terror, to build the tension, okay? Especially if we look at that first sentence, I was not alone. So we have this shift to create tension. Then, so we've got the building of the tension of the introduction of the three women who seem supernatural and quite terrifying. We also have keyword repetition. We would use in structure. We have a repetition of this reference to their sharp teeth specifically. Okay, so we might talk about that. The repetition, the reason the writer has consistently, so the why, the reason the writer has consistently commented on their teeth is to highlight their danger, to highlight the women being dangerous kind of beings, dangerous predators. And we, as looking through his eyes in first person perspective, feel fear that we, the narrator, is in imminent danger because they keep displaying their very sharp white teeth. And that contrast to the red again emphasizes their danger. Then we have another shift. Again, there will be shifts. It might be a shift to like the opening paragraph might be, a dark landscape and a description of just like a landscape. Then it will might shift to a character description. Then it might shift to dialogue. Completely depends, but make sure you break it into three. There will be shifts in there. AQA would have chosen a text where you see these shifts. So here we have a shift to Count Dracula. A shift from him writing in his diary, reflecting on his experience, then a shift to focus on the three women, then a shift to a focus on Count Dracula, and then right at the end, we have some dialogue. Now, how do you write about dialogue? You simply say, what does it reveal about the character? So in this case, the dialogue, the reason the writer, so the why, the reason the writer has used dialogue is to emphasize his power. Okay, so to emphasize his power. Okay, so as you can see here, he says, "How dare you? This man belongs to me. I had forbidden it." So we can tell that he is this powerful being. So again, the dialogue reveals that. If we didn't have dialogue here, we would see that he was quite powerful because he is quite strong in the sense that he kind of throws the women, the other female vampires away, and dominates the scene with anger and fury. But the fact that he actually speaks and the dialogue reveals that he is if we think about hierarchy, he is on top. He is the one that calls the shots. That's only revealed in the dialogue. So that's why the dialogue has been used here. It is powerful in that way. So the first paragraph, we could say, at the beginning, the writer structures the text to build tension through the use of first person narrative and Harker, so that's our narrator, Harker's uncertainty about reality. Harker reflects, "I must have fallen asleep, but I fear for all that followed was startlingly real." By starting with Harker's personal thoughts, so the bit where he is writing in his diary, the text immediately places the reader inside his mind, experiencing his fear and confusion. The structure here introduces suspense gradually, as the reader cannot yet distinguish between dream or reality and reality. This opening also contrasts the calm daylight with the unsettling night event, preparing the reader for the terrifying encounters to follow and making the tension, so linking back to the question, build slowly from the start. That is an example of a first paragraph. That is all you need to write. Then my second paragraph would be towards the middle. And then I might say, the writer shifts focus to and then I would say because, and then my third paragraph would be at the end, the writer shifts focus once again to the writer uses dialogue to, so everything I've just kind of gone through there. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer. How many PE paragraphs for question 3? 3. Okay, that's it. So paragraph 1, hopefully that's answered it. 2, 3. So 3 PE paragraphs. That is all you need to do to get full marks. And I see a lot of things online where, a lot of creators are overcomplicating it. You do not need to. That is simply it. You're commenting on what is your point, what has the writer used, and why have they used it. That is it. Okay, that's why it's only worth 8 marks. You don't need to do any more than that. Moving on. So hopefully that was a little helpful. Again, write any questions that you have. Okay, so question 4. Now this, as an examiner, is what I see, and a teacher, year on year in mocks, in the real thing. Students don't write enough for question 4. It's not quantity, it's all about the quality. But the reason they don't write enough is because they spend too long question 2 and 3. And this is a 20-mark question. So this is worth way more. So we need to make sure we are allocating enough time. Now, the biggest, what I would say, hack is that this is a combination of question 2 and 3. You are doing everything you've just done in question 2 and 3 and putting it in this question. If it fits with the statement, you can rewrite your analysis. So it's about working smart. You are being assessed on how well you can evaluate the text. When we say evaluate, that just literally means you are forming your own opinion on how well a text is written. Now, obviously, AQA have used a good text. Okay, they wouldn't use a rubbish one. So we are always going to assume that the writer is very good. Even if you don't think so, generally it will be a piece of good writing. So you are giving your opinion on why it is a good piece of writing by, question 2, looking at language features. So you're looking at language and you're looking at structure. You've already done this. You've already done this for question 2 and 3. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to reuse what you've written, okay, and make it fit with your answer. And I think that's the biggest thing that people forget. If I was to evaluate, for example, if I had, it's going to be really random, but if I had like a stain, like the Stanley Cups, and I was going to evaluate a Stanley Cup, I would say, okay, well, it's good because it is structurally really strong. So if I drop it, it doesn't break. The lid has a straw, so it's easy to pick up and drink. You don't have to waste time trying to turn the lid. It has a handle, which is really beneficial. It can fit 1 litre of water in, which means I can track how much I'm drinking a day. So you see what I'm saying? You are evaluating how good it is. So, but in this case, for language, you're evaluating how good is the writing through the writer's use of language and structural features. That is it. Okay, so you are told here, line 16 to the end. So you are going to box out, please box out. Again, so many students right outside of the lines for this. I think they get into the panic of, we don't have long left. I need to move on to question 5. And they start writing about the whole source, and then it's just not valid and doesn't answer the question. So you lose marks. In this part of the source, the 3 women and Count Dracula are shown as frightening and threatening. The writer makes the narrator seem completely helpless in this moment. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? So, how I would structure it, okay? You're going to use Peasel again, so we're keeping it simple. You're using Peasel because it is the same as question 2, essentially, and 3, okay? Peasel is obviously an extended acronym of PEE, so we're using the same. I would suggest, now, 3 to 4 Peasel paragraphs. This is the structure, the variation, I would say, okay? So, agree. Paragraph 2, you're going to disagree. I have marked full mark answers where a student has completely agreed, but generally the best answers that get the full marks are ones where students can see 2 sides. As you know, in English, when you're writing an argument or a speech or an article, whatever, you have to always consider the other point of view. It's a way you create a fair and balanced piece of writing. Although this is opinion based for evaluate, you do need to consider, I understand why that person might think that, however, and then squash it. I always think question 4 is a little bit like, and it's like your question 5 for paper 2. It's like being a solicitor, okay? You're presenting your arguments to persuade the jury. You do need to comment on the opposing view and then squash it so that you fully convince them of your opinion. That's what you're doing for this question. So again, you might do paragraph 1 and 2, agree, paragraph 3, disagree, and then if you wanted to do 4 paragraphs, paragraph 4, agree again. You are spending roughly 25 minutes on this, maybe 30. Depends how quickly you answer question 2 and 3, but 25 minutes, absolutely. So then again, it tells you can consider your impressions of how the women in Dracula behave, comment on the methods. Again, methods, I've just gone through this. Question 2 and 3. That's all you're doing. Question 2 and 3. Support your responses with references to text. So that just means quotation. So obviously using the Peasel structure, you're going to include quotations anyway. So someone in the chat said question 4 is kind of like using because, but. So exactly that. Because the explain bit is that they've used this because. On your disagreement paragraph, you might say, however, on the other hand, some people might argue. Again, this structure, using that option of disagreement, displays to the examiner that you have high level thinking and a high level of critical thinking. Here is an example. I agree that in this part of the extract, the 3 women, so just you don't need an introduction. I see some students doing this, don't need an introduction, just dive straight into your Peasel paragraph, okay? The only time you need an introduction is in literature, okay, for your literature answers. I agree that in this part of the extract, the 3 women are shown as frightening and threatening, as the writer presents them as predatory and dangerous figures. Harker observes one of the women and describes lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed about to fasten on my throat. The verb fasten suggests that the woman is like a predator about to strike, highlighting the threat she poses. The detailed focus on Harker's physical sensations, such as the skin of my throat, began to tingle, hard dents of 2 sharp teeth, just touching and pausing there, zooms in on his helplessness and the imminent danger. This imagery makes the reader experience the fear and suspense with Harker. emphasizing how powerless he is in this situation. Overall, the writer structures the scene to build tension by portraying, again linking to the question, the women as terrifying and by focusing on Harker's vulnerable, helpless position. How much does that sound like a question to? Peasel paragraph on language. Examiner reports consistently say that students see question 2 and 3 as completely isolated questions. The reason it is written in this way is so that you can build towards this question, so that you understand, oh, you know, you've warmed up on language features and you've analysed the language features, then you've done the same with structure. Now in question 4, you're putting it all together. You can repeat analysis. Examiners never see your whole paper, okay? So the way it works is that your paper is basically, you know, scanned into the system at the moment whilst you're still writing. Eventually it will go to typing, but at the moment they're scanned in, and an examiner will have like a section. So they'll mark, say, 300 question 2s, 400 question 3s, 500 question 4s, whatever it might be. But they only mark questions together. So they'll mark, like, you know, let's say 20 question 2s in one go. So they'll never see your whole paper. So they won't know if you've just basically copied a bits from question 2 and 3, nor can you not. You can absolutely do that. But just in case you're worried about that. But even though you can do that, there's so much to say about this paper and it's quite tight getting it all into an hour. But the second paragraph, because I've just focused on the 3 women there, just quickly, and the statement is about how the 3 women and Dracula are presented as threatening and frightening. My second paragraph, I would actually agree again, and I would comment on, I would say something like, I also agree that Count Dracula himself is shown as terrifying because. Then I would go on to my third paragraph, and then I would disagree. And I would say, however, you know, one could argue that Harker, the narrator, so Harker's reaction shows a mix of kind of fear and fascination. You know, he seems intrigued. And then I would go back to, I might do a fourth on squashing that and agreement. Okay, so that is question 4 in a really quick nutshell. Let's move on to question 5 to finish the session. The Travel and Adventure magazine is holding a creative writing competition. Choose one of the options for your entry. Either write a description of a setting in the woods and the atmosphere surrounding it. You may choose the picture provided for ideas, or write the opening of a story. So basically, you are choosing either a description or a narrative to write. I would say spend 5 minutes planning. So make it clear, which one do you want to write? You're going to write a description, or are you going to write a narrative, so a story? If you're not sure, ask your teacher which one you generally do better in class, okay? If you're really not sure, you might feel really comfortable writing stories, and if you're not comfortable writing stories, I always kind of say to students, go for the description. It's a little bit easier to do in the time that you are allocated, because essentially if you're spending about 5, maybe 10 minutes planning, you then only have 35 minutes to do the whole question. So remember, so it's 5 minutes planning, it is worth 50% of the entire paper of marks. So it's really important. Let me go through these. So 24 marks. So this is basically for how well it is laid out. So have you used ambitious vocabulary? Have you used good language structural features? Apologies for my writing now. So how well have you used language and structural features? Does it flow? Does it make sense? Then 60 marks is basically spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Make sure you spend a little bit of time at the end just going over and making sure you've capitalized, you've used punctuation, because silly mistakes are made. We all make them. I make them, are made when we're rushing. And you'll be rushing at this point at the end of the exam. Here is a little way that you can kind of identify the difference between description and narrative. So a narrative is basically a story and it will have characters, there will be a main event, and there will be speech, so dialogue, okay? There needs to be some sort of sense of progression. And again, it prioritizes events over description. You'll be asked to write the opening of a story. So you don't need to write the whole thing. You don't need to have a beginning, middle, and end. You are just writing the first chapter. Then description, you are creating a vivid picture. You can again screenshot that if you want to go through the difference between a description and narrative. Your narrative, your story will have elements of description in, but the difference is it will have dialogue and a main character. Description, think of yourself as a kind of a camera from afar looking down and describing what you can see. Now, I don't have time to go into how to approach these questions specifically, but if you did find this helpful, I do have a monthly membership that you can sign on to. It's $19.99 a month, and I have over 100 pre-recorded lessons. I've got language course, paper 1 and 2, launching in the next 2 weeks on there, where I go through this in so much more detail, all of it in so much more detail. So if you find that helpful, you can sign up to that. And that also includes one live lesson a month like this. One big kind of controversial topic is memorization. So memorizing texts, memorizing stories. A couple of years ago, when I was marking question fives, I noticed that a lot of students, and this is for the real GCSE, a lot of students had written the same story. And I obviously flagged it and thought, how are they all writing the same story? And then it turned out hundreds and hundreds of students had basically written the same story because someone online had posted a grade 9 story. Students had memorized it, then rewrote it in the exam. This meant that students didn't get a grade 9 for that story, because ultimately to get a grade 9, it needs to be original and unique. And ultimately that was not. So AQA are clamping down. I think we're going to see the first wave of that this exam period on plagiarism and pre-memorized stories. It's very obvious sometimes when a student has memorized a story. So the exam reports have suggested that students tend to do better when it's clearly written, directly from the question. What I would say though is, if you really struggle with using language techniques, using ambitious vocabulary, one, you can copy ambitious vocabulary and phrases from the extract that you have in there. So in this case, it would be Dracula. If you liked a particular simile or personification, you can do that. Two, you can absolutely, if you want to kind of memorize your own phrases for description and then embed it into your answer, you can do that. I have, again, in my membership, I have a whole thing on this. So I won't go into too much detail because I know that some of you will need to go because we've gone over the hour. Just looking at your questions here, what are your tips for question 5 to get over a writer's block in the exam? Okay, my biggest tip there is, I know I spoke about the pre-memorization, is you start with a short paragraph of description about, it could be, for example, here we have the woods. It's obviously daylight here, isn't it? You're only using the picture as a prompt anyway. I always kind of get my students to start with this dark, ominous, kind of gothic atmosphere. So they'll write about, let's say, a storm approaching. Now, they will craft their own paragraphs, so their own writing, and then they can go in, rewrite that, because you could write about a description here of the woods and it'd be nighttime. That's fine. The picture is just kind of there as a help. But I would say pre-write your description to begin with. So always start with a description of the atmosphere. Then what I find when students do that and they write that first paragraph and they already know what they're going to write, then suddenly they're already writing, right, I've got this down already. It shifts the mindset, and then students generally will think, okay, well, next I'm going to describe a character. I'm going to make up that there's a girl in I'm thinking red, I don't know why, I'm thinking Little Red Riding Hood. I'm going to describe a girl with a red coat looking towards a cabin. So my second paragraph might be the red girl. That way, it means that you're not just staring at a blank piece of paper. It gives you something to go in straight away, start writing, and then once you get into the writing of it, the adrenaline kicks in, and then you'll be able to kind of go to your next paragraph. I don't know if that's helpful. But again, in my membership, I go through that in a lot of detail. That was a really quick whistle-stop tour. 1 hour. Normally in lessons, I would break this up to a week. We would do like a week on breaking down every single question in a lot of detail. But again, I've got lessons, pre-recorded lessons of me going through each of these questions in so much detail on my membership. Details for the membership. Yeah, absolutely. So if you click on that link, you go straight to my website and then you'll see the membership, a button at the top. Click on that. I'm glad you found it useful. Obviously, any more questions, pop them in the chat. Excellent. So other than that, I hope you found it helpful. Good luck with your mocks. Remember, mocks are all practice. So make the mistakes in the mocks, and then when it comes to the real thing, you won't make the mistakes. So just treat them as a practice.